The smooth, worn leather of her designer handbag felt alien in his hands. Liam never went through Isabel's things. It was a line he didn't cross, a boundary built on a foundation of respect he thought was mutual. But tonight, the foundation had revealed itself to be sand. He was looking for her car keys, a mundane request she had called in from the lobby of the charity gala she was attending without him. "Darling, be a dear. I seem to have left the spare set in my Chloe bag." But as his fingers brushed past a silk wallet and a gold-plated lipstick case, they met the crisp, unfamiliar edge of folded paper. He pulled it out. It was a hotel receipt. The Grand Elysian, downtown. A king suite, 2 nights. The date was from last week, a time she had supposedly been at a wellness retreat in the countryside with friends. A cold, sharp clarity pierced the fog of his marital contentment. His thumb slid to the second receipt tucked behind the first. Same hotel, different date, 3 weeks prior. A weekend she'd claimed was a business development seminar in a neighboring city. The name on the reservation was not hers. It was Marcus Thorne, a name that hung in the air of their social circle like expensive, cloying cologne. A man whose wealth was old, whose arrogance was legendary, and whose casual proximity to Isabel had always felt like a low-grade hum of static at the edge of Liam's hearing. Liam stood in the center of the vast, open-plan living room he had designed himself. The floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over a city that glittered with a million false promises. Every line of this house, from the cantilevers that seemed to defy gravity to the warm grain of the reclaimed oak floors, was a product of his mind and his hands. He had built it as a testament to their life together, a structure of light and strength meant to shelter their future. Now he saw it for what it was, a beautiful, empty stage for a play in which he was the fool. He looked at the receipts in his hand. The paper was thin, flimsy, yet it carried the weight of a wrecking ball. He thought of Isabel's casual dismissal of his work, her family's thinly veiled condescension, her constant striving for a social stratosphere he had no interest in entering. He had always believed his quiet success, his integrity, and his love were enough. He saw now that they were not even part of the equation. They were liabilities. He placed the receipts carefully on the cold marble of the kitchen island, a single, perfect slab he had sourced from a quarry in Italy. He looked at his phone, then he made a call. "Yes," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "I need an emergency locksmith. My home address is 121 Vista Ridge Lane. I need every external lock changed. Tonight." The decision was not born of rage. It was a tectonic shift, the slow, grinding movement of a man's soul realigning itself with a new, brutal reality. Isabel thought he was a simple, plodding architect. She didn't know that the same mind that could design a skyscraper could also design its demolition. Within an hour, the foundation of her world would be fractured beyond repair. I hope this story is already grabbing you. If it is and you want to see how this plays out, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us create more stories just like this one. And for fun, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's get back to it. To understand the quiet finality of Liam's decision, you have to understand the 1,000 tiny cuts that preceded it. The poison had been dripping for years, a slow, steady erosion of his dignity administered by Isabel and her family, the Vances. The Vances were old money, which meant their wealth was less a number in a bank account and more an atmospheric pressure they exerted on everyone around them. They didn't have jobs, they had positions. They didn't have houses, they had estates. And they had an opinion on everything, especially Liam. The memory that played most vividly in Liam's mind as he waited for the locksmith was of a dinner 2 years prior, held at the Vance family's sprawling, ivy-choked mansion. It was his and Isabel's 5th anniversary. He had just won the prestigious Sterling Prize for a public library he had designed, a project that had consumed him for 3 years. It was the highest honor in his field, the equivalent of an Oscar or a Pulitzer. He was proud, not with the boastful pride of the Vances, but with the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman who knows he has done good work. He and Isabel arrived, and her mother Eleanor greeted them in the grand foyer. Eleanor was a woman sculpted from disapproval, her smile a thin, bloodless line. "Isabel, you look divine," she'd said, kissing the air near her daughter's cheek. Then her eyes landed on Liam. "And Liam, you're here." It wasn't a welcome, it was an observation, delivered with the same enthusiasm one might reserve for noticing a scuff on the floor. At dinner, seated at a table long enough to host a state dinner, the conversation was, as always, a performance. Isabel's father, Richard, a man whose face was permanently flushed from a combination of fine wine and self-importance, was holding court. Marcus Thorne just closed the deal on the waterfront development, he'd boomed, swirling a dark red liquid in his glass. "Bought out the entire consortium. A masterstroke. That's how you build a legacy, my boy." He directed the last part to Liam, a piece of advice from a king to a court jester. Liam had simply nodded. Impressive. Then Eleanor leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the light of the chandelier. "Speaking of legacies, Liam, how is your little business? Still drawing up blueprints for bungalows?" The insult was so perfectly crafted, so dismissive, that the table fell silent for a beat. Isabel shifted uncomfortably in her seat but said nothing. This was her role, the silent enabler. She would never join in the criticism, but she would never, ever defend him. Her silence was a form of assent, a quiet betrayal that stung more than any overt cruelty. Liam placed his fork down gently. He looked directly at Eleanor, his gaze steady. "Actually, Eleanor, I just won the Sterling Prize for the new city library." Richard squinted. "The what prize? Is that a local award?" "It's the highest honor in international architecture," Liam said, his voice even. "It comes with a significant grant, which my firm will be reinvesting." Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, one of those artistic things. That's lovely, dear. But it's not exactly building an empire, is it? It's important to have hobbies, I suppose, but Isabel is used to a certain standard of living. We just want to ensure she's comfortable." The implication was clear. His life's work was a hobby, and he was failing as a provider. He remembered the feeling precisely. It wasn't anger. It was a profound, wearying sadness. He looked at his wife, the woman who knew he'd been working 18-hour days, the woman who had seen the passion and the genius that went into his work. He saw her look away, her focus suddenly on straightening her silverware. In that moment, he realized that to them, he would never be enough. His success didn't register because it wasn't their kind of success. It wasn't loud. It wasn't transactional. It was built, not bought. He had created something beautiful and lasting for the public good, and they had equated it to building a birdhouse in the garage. He had excused it then. He'd told himself it was their ignorance, their narrow worldview. He'd believed Isabel's later, whispered apologies. "They just don't understand, darling. Their world is so different." But now, with the hotel receipts lying like a verdict on his kitchen island, he understood. It wasn't that they didn't understand, it was that they didn't care. And neither, it turned out, did she. The locksmith's van pulled silently into the driveway, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The work was about to begin. The humiliations were not always as formal as a dinner party. More often, they were death by 1,000 paper cuts, small moments of casual disrespect that accumulated over time, each one a grain of sand added to the scale. Liam, with his architect's mind, saw the pattern, the structural flaw in their relationship that others might have missed. He cataloged them, not out of resentment, but out of a need to understand the blueprint of his own life. There was the gallery opening a year ago. It was a retrospective for a famous sculptor, a friend of the Vance family. The room was a sea of black ties and expensive perfumes. Isabel, radiant in a silver gown, moved through the crowd with the effortless grace of a creature in its native habitat. Liam, in a perfectly tailored but unassuming suit, was at her side, or rather, slightly behind her. "Clarissa, darling," Isabel had cried, embracing a woman with a severe haircut and a bored expression. "You look fabulous. Have you met my husband, Liam?" Clarissa's eyes flickered over him for a fraction of a second. "Oh, no. What do you do?" The question was a challenge, a demand for his credentials. Before Liam could answer, Isabel jumped in, her voice light and tinkling like ice in a glass. "Liam's an architect. He builds things." She squeezed his arm, a gesture that was meant to look affectionate but felt like a restraint. She then immediately turned back to Clarissa. "Now you must tell me everything about your trip to Gstaad. Did you see the Rothschilds?" "He builds things." The words hung in the air between them. He had just completed the designs for a revolutionary pediatric hospital wing, a project that used biomimetic principles to create a healing environment for sick children. It was complex, innovative, and deeply meaningful work, and his wife, in front of her peers, had reduced it to the vocabulary of a toddler playing with blocks. He stood there, invisible, as they launched into a rapid-fire discussion of European ski resorts and mutual acquaintances. He became a piece of furniture, a silent accessory to his wife's social ambitions. Later that evening, he saw her across the crowded room, laughing with a group that included Marcus Thorne. Thorne had his hand on the small of her back, a gesture of casual possession. Liam watched them, not with jealousy, but with the detached focus of a structural engineer observing a stress fracture. He saw the way Isabel tilted her head when Thorne spoke, the way her laughter was brighter, more genuine than it ever was with him. He saw the way Thorne looked at her, not with love, but with the acquisitive gleam of a collector who has spotted a prized object. Liam had felt a familiar pang, not of anger, but of a deep, encroaching loneliness. He'd walked over to a quiet corner, near a large window overlooking the city. He'd reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around a small, smooth object. It was a custom-made USB drive, shaped like a miniature steel I-beam. On it were the complete corporate filings, financial projections, and architectural plans for a new venture he was planning. A firm that would be entirely his, built on his principles, funded by years of quiet, shrewd investments he had never spoken of to Isabel or her family. They assumed his income came from his little business. They had no idea about the patent he held on a sustainable building material, or the profits from the commercial properties he'd bought and developed under a holding company a decade ago. Holding the drive in his hand was a comfort, a secret anchor in the turbulent social waters. It was a promise to himself that one day he would build something that couldn't be dismissed, something so solid that even their willful ignorance couldn't deny it. He just hadn't realized how soon he would have to lay the first stone. That night, after the gallery event, Isabel had come to bed smelling of champagne and Thorne's sandalwood cologne. "Sorry I left you, darling," she'd murmured, already half asleep. "It was just so much networking, terribly boring." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But he had let it go. He had told himself he was being patient, that he was the bigger person, that love required grace. He now understood that grace without respect is just a form of self-deception. It was the architectural equivalent of covering a cracked foundation with expensive wallpaper. The structure was doomed, no matter how beautiful the facade. And now, as the locksmith began to methodically drill out the first lock, Liam was finally ready to tear down the facade and expose the rot beneath. The sound was clean, precise, and deeply, deeply satisfying. It was the sound of the future beginning. The third and final memory that cemented his resolve was the most recent, and in many ways, the most galling. It had happened just a month before he found the receipts. It was Isabel's birthday, and he had wanted to give her something deeply personal, something that spoke their shared language, or what he had thought was their shared language. For months, he had been working in secret on a design for a lakeside cabin, a retreat for the two of them. It wasn't a grand mansion. It was a jewel box of a building, perfectly integrated with the landscape, with every detail tailored to her tastes. A window seat where she loved to read, a studio space with northern light for her half-hearted watercolor painting, a terrace oriented perfectly for the sunset. He'd spent over 100 hours on the renderings, creating a photorealistic virtual walkthrough. It was a gift of his time, his talent, his very essence. He presented it to her on her birthday morning, over breakfast on the sun-drenched patio of the home he'd built for them. He set up his laptop, his heart thumping with a nervous, hopeful energy he hadn't felt in years. "Happy birthday, Izzy," he'd said softly. "I wanted to give you something more than just a thing. This is for us." He played the walkthrough. The virtual camera swept through the forest, revealing the elegant lines of the wooden and glass structure nestled by the water. It moved through the rooms, lingering on the details he had so lovingly crafted. When it was over, he looked at her, his face open, expectant. Isabel stared at the screen for a long moment. A slow, polite smile touched her lips. "Oh, Liam," she said, "that's very thoughtful." She picked up her coffee cup. "It's very rustic." Rustic. The word landed like a stone in a quiet pool. To him, the design was a masterpiece of organic modernism. To her, it was a log cabin. "But where would we even build this?" she continued, her tones shifting from polite appreciation to practical dismissal. "The Hamptons? The land values are astronomical, and it's so small. Eleanor's summer place in Martha's Vineyard could fit this in its guest wing." "It's not about size, Isabel," he tried to explain. "It's about the design, the feeling. It's a retreat, a place for us to escape." "Escape to what? Splinters and mosquitoes?" She laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "Darling, it's a sweet gesture, really. But what I really want for my birthday is that vintage Cartier watch we saw on Rue Saint-Honoré, the one Marcus said was a fantastic investment." And there it was again, the name, Marcus Thorne. Not just a friend, but an advisor, a tastemaker, a benchmark against which Liam was constantly measured and found wanting. He had poured his soul into a design, a piece of art meant only for her, and she had brushed it aside in favor of a status symbol recommended by another man. He had felt something inside him quietly shudder. It was the click of a lock he hadn't even realized was there. He had bought her the watch. It cost a small fortune, a sum he could easily afford but which felt like a ransom. When he gave it to her, she had squealed with delight, the same sound she made when she found the perfect pair of shoes. She hadn't once mentioned the lakeside cabin again. The laptop with the designs sat on his desk for weeks, a monument to his folly. He had tried to offer her his soul, and she had asked for a trinket instead. That was the moment he stopped trying. He didn't become cold or distant, not outwardly. He continued to play the part of the dutiful husband, but inwardly, he began to detach. He started quietly moving larger sums of his capital into the accounts for his new, independent firm. He had his lawyers review their prenuptial agreement, an agreement Isabel had laughed at when they signed it, calling it a formality for a love as solid as bedrock. He started making plans, not for revenge, not yet, but for a future that he was beginning to realize might not include her. The hotel receipts were not the cause of the collapse. They were merely the final, undeniable seismic reading that confirmed the structure was already gone. The foundation had been eroded by years of condescension, the support beams eaten away by disrespect, the load-bearing walls cracked by a profound difference in values. He wasn't just changing the locks on a house. He was condemning a structure that had been unsafe for years. The sound of the drill stopped. The locksmith called out, "First one's done, moving to the back." Liam nodded to himself in the empty, silent house. "One down, 5 to go." The demolition was proceeding on schedule. The quiet of the house was absolute now. The locksmith had finished his work an hour ago, his movements efficient and discreet, a professional accustomed to domestic turmoil. He had handed Liam a small, heavy ring of new keys, the metal still cold and sharp. "All set, sir. Nobody's getting in without one of these." The words were simple, practical, yet they resonated in the cavernous space like a formal decree. A new era had begun. Liam walked through the silent rooms, his footsteps echoing on the polished concrete floors of his study. This house, his masterpiece, had always felt like a shared space, softened by Isabel's decorative touches. A vase of flowers here, a stack of art books there. Now it felt like his again, a fortress, a sanctuary. He had methodically gone into their master bedroom, the one with the panoramic view of the city lights. He'd opened her side of the vast walk-in closet, a space filled with a colorful armory of designer clothes, shoes, and bags. He didn't touch them with anger. His movements were detached, almost surgical. He pulled out 3 large suitcases and began to pack. He packed the essentials, her toiletries, her favorite silk pajamas, the ridiculously expensive face creams that lined the bathroom counter. He packed a selection of clothes suitable for a few weeks, some casual, some formal. He packed the jewelry box from her nightstand, including the vintage Cartier watch. He wanted there to be no accusation of theft, no petty recriminations. This was not about punishment, it was about severance, a clean, sharp break. He zipped the last suitcase and wheeled all 3 into the hall, placing them neatly by the front door she would soon find impassable. It looked like the luggage of a guest who had overstayed their welcome. Now he sat in his study, a glass of single malt whiskey untouched on the desk beside him. The room was his sanctum, lined with books on architectural theory, urban planning, and engineering. On one wall hung the framed original sketch of this very house, rendered in his own hand with graphite and ink. He looked at it, seeing not just the lines of a building, but the lines of his own life. He had designed it with an open floor plan, believing it would foster intimacy and connection. The irony was bitter. The open spaces had only given the lies more room to breathe. He thought about the coming confrontation. He felt no fear, no anxiety. The emotional tempest had already passed, leaving behind a cold, hard landscape of certainty. He knew Isabel. She would not arrive with remorse. She would arrive with indignation. Her first reaction would be annoyance at the inconvenience of a faulty key. Her second would be anger at what she would perceive as a childish, dramatic gesture. She would try to manage him, to soothe, to scold, to manipulate. She would use the full arsenal of tactics that had worked for years. A flash of tears, a wounded expression, a sharp, cutting remark designed to make him feel small and unreasonable. But the man she would be confronting tonight was not the man she had left that morning. The man who had patiently absorbed years of quiet condescension was gone. The man who had accepted her hollow apologies was gone. The man who had loved her enough to forgive her trespasses, both large and small, was gone. In his place sat a stranger, a man made of the same materials as the buildings he designed: steel, stone, and glass. Strong, clear, and unyielding. He picked up the hotel receipts from his desk, where he had placed them next to a thick, bound document. The document was the finalized business plan and funding portfolio for Solstice Design Group, his new firm. The launch was scheduled for next month. It was a billion-dollar venture backed by international investors who had been courting him for years, a fact he had kept entirely to himself. The Vances, with their inherited millions and their obsession with Marcus Thorne's waterfront deal, were playing in the sandlot while he had been quietly building a mountain. He heard the purr of a car engine in the driveway, a familiar sound, Isabel's Porsche. The headlights swept across his study window, and then the engine cut out. The silence that followed was heavy with anticipation. He heard the click of her heels on the stone walkway. Then, the sound he had been waiting for, the scrape of a key in a lock, a jiggle, another scrape, and then a frustrated grunt, a pause. The sound of her dialing her phone echoed faintly through the thick glass. His own phone, sitting on the desk, remained dark. He had turned it off. She would have to use the intercom. He leaned back in his leather chair, the untouched whiskey glowing like liquid gold under the desk lamp. The quiet before the storm was over. The first drops of rain were beginning to fall. The buzz from the intercom was sharp, impatient. It cut through the silence of the house like a shard of glass. Liam let it ring 3 times before pressing the button. Yes? His voice was calm, neutral. Liam? What the hell is going on? My key isn't working. Isabel's voice was tight with annoyance, not concern. It was the tone she used when a waiter was slow or a reservation was lost. I know, he said. There was a pause on the other end. He could practically hear her processing his response. This was not in the script she was used to. What do you mean, you know? Is the lock broken? Did you do something? Open the door, it's cold out here. I'll be right there, he said, and cut the connection. He walked from his study, through the grand, silent living room. He didn't rush. Each step was deliberate. He was no longer a character in her play. He was the director of his own. He reached the enormous, solid oak door, another feature he had designed, and pulled it inward. Isabel stood on the doorstep, silhouetted against the night. She looked magnificent even in her frustration. Her gala gown shimmered, and a diamond necklace glittered at her throat. Her face, however, was a mask of fury. What is this, Liam? Some kind of joke? I have been standing out here for 5 minutes. He didn't answer. He simply stepped back, holding the door open for her to enter. She swept past him, her perfume filling the air. Honestly, if you were angry that I went to the gala without you, this is an incredibly childish way to show it. We'll talk about it in the morning. I'm exhausted. She started walking toward the grand staircase, already dismissing him, assuming this was a minor squabble she could smooth over later. We'll talk about it now, Liam said. His tone stopped her cold. She turned, one hand on the railing, and finally seemed to register the atmosphere in the room. The silence, the coldness. Her eyes darted around and then landed on the 3 suitcases standing neatly by the door. Confusion warred with anger on her face. What is that? Are you leaving? After all I've done to build this life for us, you're just going to walk out because you're in a mood? The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of her statement almost made him laugh. All I've done to build this life for us, she truly believed it. She believed her social climbing, her networking with people who despised him, was a contribution, a form of labor. No, Isabel, he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. I'm not leaving. He walked past her, toward the kitchen island. She followed, her heels clicking in angry rhythm on the floor. These are for you. For me? What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind? He reached the island and gestured to the 2 thin slips of paper lying on the marble surface. They looked so small, so insignificant in the vastness of the room. I was looking for your spare car keys, he said. I found these instead. Isabel's eyes followed his gesture. She leaned forward, squinting at the papers. He watched her face as recognition dawned. He saw the flicker of panic in her eyes, quickly masked by a practiced nonchalance. She straightened up, tossing her hair back. Oh, it's nothing. Nothing? Liam repeated the word, letting it hang in the air. 2 stays, in a king's suite, at the Grand Elysian, with Marcus Thorne. You call that nothing? She tried to bluff, to seize control of the narrative. Don't be ridiculous. I was with my girlfriends. Marcus was there with a business associate. We probably just had drinks in the hotel bar. You're blowing this completely out of proportion. It was a masterful performance of indignation. The wronged wife, falsely accused by a suspicious, controlling husband. A few years ago it might have worked. He might have doubted himself, apologized for his lack of trust, but not tonight. Tonight he had the receipts, both literally and figuratively. The reservation was in his name, Isabel, Liam said, his voice like ice. For a single suite, for 2 nights, twice. He picked up one of the receipts. And according to the room service charges, you and your girlfriends have a taste for a specific single malt whiskey that Marcus Thorne is known for drinking. And you ordered breakfast for 2, delivered to the room, at 9 in the morning on both occasions. The color drained from her face. The details. It was always the details that undid a liar. Her carefully constructed facade began to crack. Her bluster deflated, replaced by a desperate, scrambling defense. He was having a difficult time. His deal was in jeopardy. He needed someone to talk to. I was just being a friend. A friend? Liam's voice rose for the first time, not in anger, but in sheer, incredulous disbelief. A friend who comforts him in a $1,000 a night hotel suite while telling your husband you're at a wellness retreat? You wouldn't understand, she finally burst out, her voice cracking. You're so wrapped up in your little projects, your blueprints and your models. You have no idea what it's like in the real world, the pressures, the connections you have to maintain. Marcus is important. He's an important person in our lives. In your life, Isabel, he corrected her, his voice dropping back to that unnerving calm. Not ours. There is no ours anymore. He gestured again to the suitcases. You can stay with your mother, or you can go back to the Grand Elysian. I'm sure Marcus has a suite available, but you are not staying here. She stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. It was clear she still couldn't process the reality of the situation. You can't be serious. You're throwing me out? Of my own home? And that was the line, the one he had been waiting for, the culmination of years of quiet condescension. My own home. Liam allowed a small, cold smile to touch his lips. That's where you're wrong, Isabel, he said, the words landing like perfectly placed stones. That's the first of many things you've been wrong about. This house? It was never your home. Not legally. I built it, I paid for it, and the deed has only ever been in one name, mine. The confession hung in the air, a quiet bomb that obliterated the very ground she stood on. The theatrical indignation on Isabel's face dissolved, replaced by a stark, naked look of disbelief. Her mind, so quick and agile in social maneuvering, seemed to grind to a halt, unable to compute this new, impossible variable. What did you say? The house, Liam repeated, enunciating each word with crystalline precision. The land was purchased by a trust I established 5 years before we were even married. The construction was financed entirely by my personal accounts. You are not on the deed. You are not on the mortgage because there is no mortgage. You have never been anything more than a guest here. A long-term guest, I'll grant you, but a guest nonetheless. Isabel shook her head, a slow, jerky motion. No, that's not possible. We chose the finishes together. I picked out the furniture, the landscaping. She was grasping at straws, at memories of shared decisions, trying to weave them into a tapestry of ownership. You offered opinions, which I indulged, Liam said, his voice devoid of emotion. You were a consultant on the aesthetic, nothing more. It was a pleasant fiction we both maintained. You because it bolstered your sense of status, and me, he paused, his gaze turning inward for a moment, because I loved you, and I wanted you to feel like this was our shared creation. It was a mistake, one I am now correcting. Her disbelief began to curdle into a venomous rage. The cornered animal was preparing to lash out. You bastard, she hissed, her voice low and trembling. You deceitful, lying bastard. All this time you let me believe— Let you believe what? Liam interjected, his voice cutting through hers like a scalpel. That this life was yours for the taking? That my work, my success, was a resource for you to plunder for your social ambitions? I let you believe I was a simple man, Isabel. A plodding architect who builds things. I let you and your family underestimate me because I thought my character and our love would eventually speak for themselves. I was wrong. Your family values balance sheets, not character. And you value attention, not love. He began to walk around the island, closing the distance between them. For the first time, she took an involuntary step back. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had inverted completely. You want to talk about deceit? He continued, his voice a quiet storm. Let's talk about deceit. Let's talk about the wellness retreats, the business seminars, the way you introduce me at parties as if I'm a handyman you're forced to acknowledge. Let's talk about your mother asking if my life's work is a hobby. Let's talk about you dismissing a gift I poured my soul into in favor of a watch recommended by the man you were sleeping with. He was cataloging her sins, each one a hammer blow against her crumbling defenses. This was the list of grievances, the meticulous accounting of a patient man who had finally reached his limit. You think Marcus Thorne is power? Liam scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. His empire is a house of cards built on debt and leverage. His waterfront deal is so over-leveraged that a single-point interest rate hike would bankrupt him. I've seen his financials. They're a joke. Isabel stared at him, her eyes wide with confusion. How could you possibly know that? Because the world you and your family inhabit is a tiny, gilded cage, Isabel. You see status, parties, and brand names. I see structures, financial structures, corporate structures. And I have made it my business to understand the structure of everything around me. He stopped directly in front of her. You thought I was building bungalows, and I let you think that. While you were networking at galas, I was building an empire of my own, quietly, methodically, on a solid foundation. She was speechless, her mind reeling. The man standing before her was a stranger. The quiet, accommodating husband had been replaced by a titan she had never even known existed. Her entire worldview, a system built on a clear hierarchy of status and wealth, was shattering. She had placed him at the bottom, and he was revealing that he owned the entire pyramid. So, no, Liam said, his voice softening to an almost gentle finality. I am not throwing you out of your home. I am revoking your guest privileges in mine. Your bags are by the door. I suggest you call your mother. Or Marcus. I'm sure one of them will be happy to take you in. He turned his back on her then, a gesture of absolute dismissal, and walked toward his study, leaving her alone in the vast, silent room with the ruins of her life. Isabel stood frozen for a full minute, the echoes of Liam's words reverberating in the cathedral-like silence of the house. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. The shock was so profound it was physical. A cold numbness spread through her limbs. She looked around the room, the soaring ceilings, the artfully lit alcoves, the seamless expanse of glass overlooking the city, and saw it for the first time not as her stage, but as his fortress. A place where she had been living on a visa that had just been irrevocably canceled. Panic, raw and primal, finally broke through the paralysis. Her hand trembled as she fumbled in her evening bag for her phone. Her first instinct, ingrained since childhood, was to call for reinforcements. She didn't call Marcus. Calling her lover would be an admission of guilt, a confirmation of everything Liam had said. She called her mother. Eleanor Vance answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and alert. Isabel? Is the gala over already? Did you manage to have a word with the ambassador's wife? Mother, Isabel choked out, the single word collapsing into a sob. You have to come over. Now. It's Liam. Liam? Eleanor's tone sharpened with disdain. What has he done now? Did he scuff the floors? Forget to take out the recycling? Honestly, the dramas you have with that man. He's throwing me out, Isabel wailed, the words tumbling out in a rush. He's packed my bags. He's changed the locks. He said the house isn't mine. He said it's all in his name. Mother, he's gone insane. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, Eleanor's voice returned, transformed. The lazy condescension was gone, replaced by the sharp, commanding tone of a general whose territory was under attack. Don't you move. Don't say another word to him. I'll be there in 15 minutes. We'll see about this. We'll see who's throwing whom out of where. True to her word, Eleanor's Mercedes screeched into the driveway precisely 14 minutes later. Isabel, who had been pacing the foyer like a caged animal, wrenched the door open before her mother could even use the intercom. Eleanor swept in, a fur-collared coat draped over her shoulders, despite the mild evening. Her eyes, cold and assessing, took in the scene. Her daughter's tear-streaked face, the luggage by the door, the unnerving quiet of the house. "Where is he?" she demanded. "In his study," Isabel whispered. "Right." Eleanor squared her shoulders and marched toward the study, Isabel trailing in her wake like a nervous foot soldier. She didn't bother to knock. She pushed the heavy door open and strode in. Liam was seated behind his desk, not looking insane, but looking impossibly, infuriatingly calm. He was reviewing a set of architectural drawings under the warm glow of a desk lamp. He didn't immediately look up, letting them stand there for a moment, stewing in their own indignation. Finally, he lifted his eyes, his expression unreadable. "Eleanor, I should have known you'd be summoned." "What is the meaning of this outrage, Liam?" Eleanor began, her voice resonating with years of practiced authority. "Upsetting my daughter, changing locks, making these ridiculous, baseless claims. Have you been drinking?" "I have a glass of whiskey, which I haven't touched," Liam replied evenly, gesturing to the glass. "And my claims are not ridiculous. They are factual. Isabel has been carrying on an affair with Marcus Thorne. I have proof. As a result, I have asked her to leave my house." Eleanor waved a dismissive hand, as if swatting away a fly. "An affair? Don't be so provincial. Isabel has friends, important friends. If you were a more attentive husband, perhaps she wouldn't need to seek companionship elsewhere. This is a marital spat. You will apologize to her, and we can all forget this sordid little outburst." Liam leaned back in his chair, a flicker of something that looked like pity in his eyes. "Eleanor, your daughter is a 35-year-old woman, not a naughty schoolgirl you can excuse with a note. Her actions have consequences, and you are in no position to be making demands." "I am in every position," Eleanor snapped. "This is my daughter's home. The home you have only because of the connections and status her family brought to this marriage. You were a no-name architect before you met her." Liam's calm finally broke, but not into anger. It broke into a quiet, devastating clarity. "Let's be very clear, Eleanor. I was a Sterling Prize-winning architect before you even knew my name. You just didn't know how to value it. You and your family have spent 7 years treating me with a level of condescension I wouldn't show to a stranger on the street. You have mocked my career, belittled my achievements, and openly encouraged my wife to disrespect me. You have done this because you believe your inherited money makes you superior. You are about to learn a very painful lesson about the difference between inherited wealth and earned power." He reached across his desk and picked up the thick, bound document, the portfolio for Solstice Design Group. He slid it across the polished wood surface. "That is the prospectus for my new firm. It launches in 3 weeks. It's a multinational consortium focusing on sustainable urban development. It is valued conservatively at $900 million. My personal stake, based on my intellectual property and private capital, is 60%. Eleanor stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake. Isabel let out a small, choked sound. "The Vance's entire family net worth, including your mansion, your art collection, and Richard's dwindling portfolio, is roughly $50 million, Liam continued, his voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. "That's a respectable sum. My firm will generate that much in revenue in its first fiscal quarter. So when I tell you that this is my house and that I want you and your daughter to leave it, I am not making a request. I am stating a fact from a position of power you cannot possibly comprehend. You are no longer dealing with your daughter's quiet, unassuming husband. You are dealing with the man who can and will buy and sell everything you've ever held dear without a second thought. He stood up. Your daughter's infidelity was the symptom. The disease was a profound lack of respect, a disease you have nurtured in her since the day we met. The treatment is a clean separation. Now, for the last time, please escort your daughter from my property, or I will have security do it for you. The authority in his voice was absolute. Eleanor Vance, for the first time in her life, was utterly and completely silenced. She looked from the document on the desk to Liam's cold, determined face, and in that moment she understood. They hadn't just underestimated him, they had misjudged the very nature of reality. The aftermath of Liam's revelation was not loud or explosive. It was a profound, suffocating silence. Eleanor stood rooted to the spot, her face a pale, slack mask of shock. The armor of her lifelong arrogance had been shattered, and she was left exposed and powerless. She looked at the portfolio on the desk, then at Liam, and finally at her daughter. In her eyes, Isabel could see a dawning horror, not for her daughter's emotional pain, but for the colossal, strategic blunder they had made. They had picked a fight with a king, believing him to be a peasant. Without another word, Eleanor turned. She grabbed Isabel's arm, her grip surprisingly strong, and pulled her from the study. Her march back through the house was not one of indignation, but a full-scale retreat. Isabel stumbled after her, numb. The world had been turned upside down. The man she had considered a mild, manageable beta, a stable but unexciting provider, was a predator who had been watching her from the shadows, patient and silent, all along. Eleanor didn't speak until they were outside, in the cold night air, standing beside her Mercedes. "Get in the car, Isabel." Her voice was flat, dead. "But my things," Isabel began, gesturing feebly toward the house. "The things are irrelevant," Eleanor snapped, her control finally breaking. "Do you have any idea what you have done? We mocked him. We mocked his work. We treated him like the help. And he's that." She gestured vaguely at the magnificent house, which now seemed less like a home and more like the headquarters of a hostile power. $900 million. She whispered the number, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Isabel sank into the passenger seat, the luxurious leather offering no comfort. The drive to the Vance estate was made in a thick, toxic silence. When they arrived, Richard was in the library, reading the Wall Street Journal. He looked up, annoyed. "Good Lord, what's happened? You both look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," Eleanor said, stripping off her coat. "We've seen a balance sheet." The story spilled out, first from a hysterical Isabel, then clarified by Eleanor's grim, tactical summary. Richard listened, his face slowly turning from its usual ruddy complexion to a sickly gray. He, more than either of them, understood the implications. He was a man who dealt in numbers and power, and he had just learned he'd been playing checkers while Liam was playing multi-dimensional chess. "Marcus Thorne?" Richard finally said, his voice a low growl. "You threw away a $500 million man for Marcus Thorne? Thorne is a peacock, all feathers, no substance. I've been hearing rumors for months that he's overextended." The next few days were a blur of frantic activity for the Vances and quiet, methodical progress for Liam. While Isabel was confined to her childhood bedroom, fielding tearful calls from friends to whom she gave a heavily edited version of events, Liam was executing his plan. His first call the next morning was to David Chen, his partner and the COO of their soon-to-be launched firm. David was a sharp, loyal friend who had long been aware of the Vances' condescension. "He did what?" David exclaimed after Liam gave him the summary. "Man, I'm sorry you had to go through that. But also, it's about time. I never liked the way they treated you. What's the play?" "The play is surgical," Liam said. "I've already spoken to Catherine Vance, no relation, thankfully, the best divorce attorney in the state. The prenup is ironclad, especially with the infidelity clause. I need you to start the corporate communications rollout for Solstice a week early. I want our presence established before any rumors can take root. And one more thing. I need you to look into the commercial holdings of Thorn Development. On it, David said. Consider it done. 2 days later, David called back. You're not going to believe this. Thorn's flagship office, that big glass tower downtown, he doesn't own it. He's in the middle of a 10-year lease, and the building's owner is a shell corporation based in Delaware. I know, Liam said calmly. It's one of mine. I bought it 3 years ago as a distressed asset. The lease is up for renewal in 6 months. I want you to draft a notice of non-renewal and find out who holds the primary note on his waterfront development project. David was silent for a moment, then he let out a low whistle. Liam, you absolute savage. You've been planning this for years. I haven't been planning a war, David, Liam corrected him. I've just been building a fortress. I never expected to have to use the cannons. The first cannon shot was fired a week later. An announcement appeared in all major financial publications. Solstice Design Group, a new global leader in sustainable architecture, launches with a $1.2 billion valuation, helmed by visionary architect and Sterling Prize winner, Liam Sterling. The valuation was even higher than he'd told the Vances. His face, a portrait of quiet confidence, was on the cover of Forbes. The social shockwave was immediate. The Vances' phones began ringing off the hook. Friends who had previously sympathized with Isabel's plight were suddenly distant, confused. The narrative of the unstable, jealous husband was instantly obliterated. The new narrative was far more terrifying. The Vances and their daughter had profoundly, publicly, and catastrophically disrespected one of the most powerful new players in the country. The second cannon shot landed directly on Marcus Thorne. He received a formal notice that his lease would not be renewed, forcing him to relocate his entire corporate headquarters. Simultaneously, the bank holding the note on his over-leveraged waterfront project, having caught wind of the instability and having been quietly courted by Solstice Group's financial arm, called in a portion of his loan. Thorne was suddenly facing a liquidity crisis. His calls to Isabel went from flirtatious to panicked to non-existent. Isabel, isolated in her parents' mansion, watched it all unfold on her laptop. She saw Liam's face everywhere, his success lauded, his vision celebrated. The man she had dismissed as a background character was now the protagonist of a story in which she was becoming a tragic footnote. The world she had worshipped, the world of status and appearance, was turning its back on her with brutal efficiency. She had bet on the wrong horse, and now the entire stable was burning down around her. Her humiliation was no longer a private, domestic affair. It was a public spectacle. The legal proceedings were, as Liam had predicted, swift and brutal. Catherine Vance, his attorney, was a shark in a Chanel suit. She presented the prenuptial agreement, the hotel receipts, and a mountain of financial documents that established Liam's sole ownership of every significant asset acquired during the marriage. The Vances' legal team, who had started the process with arrogant bluster, were quickly humbled. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and out-resourced. The battleground was a sterile conference room in Catherine's law firm, a space of polished mahogany and muted colors. Liam sat at one end of the long table, flanked by Catherine and David Chen. At the other end sat Isabel, her parents, and their 2 lawyers. It was the first time Liam had seen her since that night. She looked smaller, diminished. The designer clothes hung on her as if on a stranger. The defiant spark in her eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a weary, haunted look. Our position is quite simple, Catherine began, her voice crisp. Mr. Sterling is prepared to be generous. He will not be enforcing the infidelity clause to its full, punitive extent, which would leave Mrs. Sterling with nothing. He is offering a one-time, lump sum payment of $500,000, and she may keep her personal effects, including jewelry and the vehicle he purchased for her. This is conditional on a swift, clean, and uncontested divorce. Isabel's lawyer, a portly man named Henderson, scoffed. $500,000? That's an insult. Mr. Sterling's net worth is now public knowledge. We are talking about a marital estate in the hundreds of millions. Mrs. Sterling is entitled to a significant portion of that. Catherine smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. Mr. Henderson, you are either misinformed or deliberately obtuse. There is no marital estate. The prenuptial agreement, which your client signed with full understanding, clearly delineates Mr. Sterling's pre-existing assets and all assets derived from his privately held companies as his sole and separate property. Solstice Design Group is the culmination of those private companies. Its value is not, and never has been, community property. We will contest the validity of the prenup, Henderson blustered. It is clearly unconscionable, given the eventual disparity in wealth. Contest it, Catherine said, leaning back. It will take years. It will cost your clients millions in legal fees, and you will lose. The document is ironclad. In the meantime, Mr. Sterling's offer will be rescinded, and we will proceed with the full force of the infidelity statutes. We have sworn affidavits from the staff at the Grand Elysian. We have Marcus Thorne's financial records, which show him expensing the rooms to his company, a fact his board is now very interested in. By the time you are done, Isabel will be lucky to walk away with the clothes on her back. The room fell silent. Richard and Eleanor exchanged a panicked look. They had already spent a small fortune on legal fees just to get to this point, and the prospect of a long, public, and losing battle was terrifying. Liam had remained silent throughout the exchange, watching. He wasn't interested in the legal maneuvering. He was interested in Isabel. He wanted to see if there was any flicker of remorse, any sign that she understood the true nature of her transgression. He saw only fear and a bitter sense of entitlement. He leaned forward, speaking for the first time. His voice was quiet, but it commanded the attention of everyone in the room. This isn't about the money. It was never about the money. He looked directly at Isabel, forcing her to meet his gaze. You could have had everything. We could have shared everything. The house, the wealth, the future. All it required was one thing you were never willing to give: respect. He was holding up the moral mirror, forcing her to see the ugly reflection of her own behavior. I didn't hide my success from you to be deceitful. I hid it because I wanted you to love me, Liam, the man who designed libraries and hospitals, not Liam Sterling, the CEO of a billion-dollar company. I wanted to see if you could value a man for his character, not his wallet. I gave you 7 years to see the man, and you never once looked. Tears began to well in Isabel's eyes, but they were tears of self-pity, not remorse. You set me up, she whispered. It was a test, a cruel, impossible test. Was it? Liam asked, his voice genuinely curious. Was it impossible to be kind? Was it impossible to defend your husband when your mother called his life's work a hobby? Was it impossible to show appreciation for a gift that came from the heart? Was it impossible not to sleep with another man in a hotel suite while I was at home, working to build the very life you claimed to want? He let the questions hang in the air, each one an indictment. The money is irrelevant. This is about the foundation. Our foundation was rotten, Isabel. It was built on your condescension and my foolish patience. I'm just the one who finally had the courage to condemn the building before it collapsed and killed us both. He stood up. The offer of $500,000 is on the table for 24 hours. After that, it's gone, and Catherine will do what she does best. The choice is yours. He turned to his own team. David, Catherine, we're done here. He walked out of the room without a backward glance, leaving Isabel and her family to sit with the wreckage. The choice was theirs, but he had already made his. He was choosing to build on solid ground. 23 hours later, a signed acceptance of the offer was delivered to Catherine Vance's office. Isabel had taken the deal. The Vances could not afford the financial or social cost of a prolonged war. The quiet, swift surrender was a humiliation in itself, an admission of their complete and utter defeat. A few months passed. The divorce was finalized with the quiet stroke of a judge's pen. The story, which had been a brief, feverish topic of gossip in their old social circles, faded as new scandals emerged. Life moved on. For Liam, moving on meant moving forward. The launch of Solstice Design Group was more successful than even his most optimistic projections. Their innovative approach to sustainable, human-centric design caught the global zeitgeist. Projects poured in from around the world. A new carbon-neutral city district in Scandinavia, a cutting-edge research university in South Korea, a sprawling public park system that would revitalize a struggling American city. He was busy, fulfilled, and surrounded by a team that respected his vision and shared his passion. The house on Vista Ridge Lane, once a monument to a failed marriage, became his sanctuary again, a place of quiet reflection and creative energy. One crisp autumn afternoon, he was driving through a less glamorous part of the city when he saw her. Isabel. She was coming out of a mid-range department store, carrying a shopping bag that was conspicuously not from Chloe or Prada. She was dressed nicely, but the expensive, effortless sheen she once possessed was gone. She looked ordinary. Her car, the Porsche he had let her keep, was parked at a meter on the street. It looked out of place in the grimy surroundings. He saw her fumble for a moment, realizing her meter had expired, and a flicker of panic crossed her face as she saw a parking enforcement officer approaching. Liam felt a strange pang. It wasn't pity, not exactly. It was a sense of profound distance, as if he were looking at a character from a book he had read long ago. He could have stopped. He could have offered a kind word, paid her parking ticket. The old Liam, the patient, accommodating Liam, might have. But that man was gone. He knew that any interaction would be misconstrued, as gloating, as pity, as an opening to re-engage. He had severed the connection cleanly, and it needed to remain severed for both their sakes. He drove on. He later heard through the grapevine that Isabel had tried to re-enter her old social world, but her currency was gone. She was no longer Mrs. Liam Sterling, wife of the visionary billionaire. She was Isabel Vance, the divorcee who had made a catastrophic miscalculation. Marcus Thorne, his own empire crumbling, wanted nothing to do with her. Her old friends offered air kisses and empty condolences before moving on to more important people. Her parents, Richard and Eleanor, had become social pariahs in their own right, their names synonymous with poor judgment. They were forced to sell their mansion and downsize, their atmospheric pressure reduced to a mild breeze. Isabel, humbled and stripped of her status, eventually took a job managing an art gallery, a position her mother secured through a last remaining connection. It wasn't the life she had envisioned, but it was a life. Reports were that she was quieter now, less arrogant. She was learning to live with the consequences of her choices. It wasn't a Hollywood ending where she found true love and inner peace, but it was a form of reality, a form of justice. One evening, Liam was working late in his study. David Chen stopped by on his way out. "Burning the midnight oil again, boss?" "Just sketching," Liam said, smiling. He turned the page around. It was a preliminary drawing for a lakeside cabin, nestled in a forest. It was a new design, similar in spirit to the one he had designed for Isabel, but different, wiser, stronger. "For a client?" David asked. "No," Liam said, his gaze soft. "For me." He was building again, not for a partner, not for a future with someone else, but for himself. He had learned the most critical lesson of his life, a lesson that applied as much to architecture as it did to love. A structure is only as strong as its foundation, and the only foundation you can ever truly count on is the one you build for yourself. out of integrity, self-respect, and a clear understanding of your own worth. The past was a blueprint of what not to do. The future was an empty site, waiting for a new design, a new creation, built to last. And so, we come to the end of Liam and Isabel's story. It's a powerful reminder, isn't it? A reminder that true worth isn't about the labels you wear or the company you keep. It's not about inherited status or the approval of others. True worth is built, not bought. It's constructed quietly, day by day, through integrity, hard work, and self-respect. Liam's story shows us that patience isn't weakness, and silence isn't inaction. Sometimes the most powerful move is the one you prepare in quiet, the foundation you lay when no one is watching. When you know your own value, you don't need anyone else to validate it. And when the time comes, you have the strength to demand the respect you deserve and to walk away from anything and anyone who refuses to give it. What do you think? Did Liam do the right thing? Was his response too harsh? Or was it exactly what Isabel and her family deserved? I'd love to read your thoughts on this in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see the different perspectives on these complex situations. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more content like this. Every subscription helps us to keep telling stories that matter. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.